Hi, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Samantha, and I am the Campaigns and Inclusion Sabbatical Officer at UJS. We are thrilled to have Keshet UK here today to mark and celebrate LGBT History Month. Today, they're going to be talking about activists and scientists. Due to some technical difficulties, we have chosen to pre-record this session. However, if you have any questions while watching, make sure to leave them down below and we will get back to you. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay, so my name's Esther, and I have on another screen my colleague Sarah, and we work for a charity called Keshet UK. Now, some of you may have heard of us before, some of you might not, but Keshet UK is an education and training charity that works in lots of Jewish student settings, just like this one. We also work with schools and in youth groups and with synagogues and Jewish communal organizations. And we want to work with any Jewish organization that a Jewish LGBT plus person and their family will walk into to make sure that everyone has the experience that they deserve to have. Now, we do this because Keshet UK exists to try and ensure no one in the Jewish community is forced to choose between their LGBT plus identity and their Jewish identity. And we do this through education and training. Today, after a brief description of LGBT plus History Month, we're going to start by telling you about our personal heroes in the field of LGBT plus activism. Then we're going to share a little bit about the lives of 6 amazing LGBT plus scientists, and then have a look at the changes that are being made to spoken Hebrew to include LGBT plus people. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Sarah.
Thank you so much, Esther. So, LGBT plus History Month, why is it important? Why do we need to focus on these contributions? Well, history often misses the contributions that have been made by individuals from the LGBT plus community, and this might wrongly give the impression that LGBT plus people have only been around very recently, or perhaps that those individuals haven't made any noteworthy contributions. So, LGBT plus History Month is a fantastic opportunity to educate people about the rich history of LGBT plus people's achievements. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about the person who came up with the idea for LGBT plus History Month. This is Sue Sanders. She was born in 1947 in London, and Sue is a lesbian who's an LGBT plus and disability rights activist, and she's specialised in challenging discrimination both in the public and the voluntary sectors for over 40 years. She initially worked as a teacher, but after 1984, she worked as a management consultant and as a trainer for both the public and voluntary sector. She was initially a member of the LGBT plus advisory group for the Metropolitan Police, and she was an independent advisor to the London Criminal Justice Board. She's also a member of the Hate Crime Independent Advisory Group for the Ministry of Justice for the government. In 2007, she was responsible for setting up a resource called The Classroom. This has lesson plans that integrate LGBT plus people in all their diversity for all ages across the UK school curriculum. She co-runs an organisation called Outing the Past, which is an international festival of LGBT plus history. And in the year 2000, she became co-chair of a group called Schools Out, which works for the equality of LGBT plus people in the education system. And it was as part of this that in 2004, she instituted the UK's LGBT plus History Month, an annual event which happens across schools and workplaces every February. The first LGBT plus History Month took place in 2005. So we are delighted to be running this session in collaboration with UJS as part of this month, which marks the 20th anniversary of this nationwide event. It's also the 3rd year that UJS and Keshet UK have worked together to bring you this unique workshop.
For 2025, the theme for LGBT plus History Month is activism and social change. Activism refers to the practice of taking action to affect social, political, economic, or environmental change. It encompasses a wide range of activities, from grassroots organising and protests to lobbying, advocacy, and community outreach. Social activism can include marches, strikes, petitions, letters, sit-ins, boycotts, digital activism, and community organising. Both of us are going to share a little bit about an activist who is a personal hero. I'm going to start with mine, and that is Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury was born on the 5th of September 1946, and he was a British singer and songwriter who achieved worldwide fame as the lead vocalist and pianist of the rock band Queen. He's regarded as one of the greatest singers in the history of rock music, and he was known for his flamboyant stage personality and 4-octave vocal range. Freddie defied the conventions of a rock frontman with his theatrical style influencing the artistic direction of Queen as well as the band's music. Having previously studied and written music, he formed Queen in 1970 with guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor. Freddie wrote numerous hits for Queen, including ones you may have heard of, like We Are the Champions and Bohemian Rhapsody. Freddie Mercury was not your standard LGBT+ activist. For example, throughout his life, he never publicly came out about his sexuality. And although homosexuality had been decriminalised in the UK in 1967, in the decades immediately after, there was still a lot of fear, misunderstanding, and social disapproval. As a result of this fear, during public events in the 1980s, Mercury often kept a distance from his partner, Jim Hutton. However, he spent his career breaking down fashion barriers with his flamboyance, and also produced hit songs that improved visibility and understanding for LGBT+ people to a worldwide audience. For example, in videos like I Want to Break Free, Mercury and his bandmates don drag to challenge gender roles and stereotypes, sparking conversations about identity and freedom of expression. Through his visual storytelling, Freddie provided a platform for LGBT+ representation and empowerment, and he paved the way for greater visibility and acceptance in the mainstream media. Now, one of the most important ways that Freddie became an activist was by bringing light to the HIV and AIDS crisis. The AIDS epidemic began in 1981, and the 1980s and early 1990s were marked by widespread fear, stigma, and ignorance about HIV and AIDS. Freddie exhibited these symptoms as early as 1982, although he was not diagnosed until 1987, when he was 40 years old. He did not publicly talk about his diagnosis or his illness until the day before he died in 1991, when he issued the following public statement. Following the enormous conjecture in the press over the last 2 weeks, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and I have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has come now for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth, and I hope that everyone will join me, my doctors, and all those worldwide in the fight against this terrible disease. As the first major rock star to die of AIDS-related complications, his death represented an important event in the history of the disease. At a time when the media was punishingly cruel to gay men who were suffering through the HIV and AIDS pandemic, Freddie's statement and death brought about a significant shift in public perception. In 1992, the remaining members of Queen founded the Mercury Phoenix Trust and organized the Freddie Mercury Tribute Concert for AIDS awareness to celebrate the life and legacy of Freddie Mercury and to raise money for AIDS research. The Mercury Phoenix Trust has since raised millions of pounds for various different AIDS charities. Now, I chose Freddie Mercury as one of my LGBT+ heroes for a number of different reasons, but I just want to share a few with you. Even though he lived during a very complicated time for gay men and LGBT+ people in general, he never ever let that stop him being himself on stage, and actually people respected him for it. That's what he became known for. Another reason is because although he became unwell, he chose to use this to change public perception and to make things better for future generations of gay men and LGBT+ people. And lastly, he's inspired countless people worldwide to break gender stereotypes and to be themselves. And he's shown that you can do that and still be successful, even to the point of being adored by millions across the world. Thank you for listening to my little bit about Freddie Mercury. I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to tell you a bit about one of her LGBT+ activist heroes.
Thank you so much, Esther. Yes, this is Andrea Dworkin. She is definitely one of my activist heroes and has been so for many years. Andrea was a Jewish left-wing feminist who dedicated her life to analysing society, culture and politics through the prism of men's sexual violence against women. she became one of the most influential writers and spokeswomen of American left-wing feminism during the late 1970s and the 1980s. Her writings, which span 3 decades, focus on an examination of subjects which have historically been written about or described from men's point of view, including fairy tales, same-sex attraction, racism, anti-Semitism, and the Holocaust. However, she is particularly known for her campaigning against pornography. Andrea was born in New Jersey, USA in September 1946 to Jewish parents whose families had fled Russia and Hungary. As a child, her Jewish household was in many ways dominated by the memory of the Holocaust. However, nonetheless, it provided a broadly happy childhood. Her father was a school teacher and a dedicated socialist. Dworkin credits him with inspiring her passion for social justice. Furthermore, her mother's belief in legal birth control and abortion long before these were respectable beliefs inspired her later activism. So much of Andrea's work originates in her Jewish parents' belief in social justice and in human rights. Dworkin began writing poetry and fiction as a teenager. While at secondary school, she was undecided about whether to become a lawyer or a writer. However, because of her interest in abortion at a time when terminations were illegal, she chose writing. Using her skills as a writer and harnessing her personal experience of sexual and domestic abuse, she supported campaigns in America that focused on men's violence against women. In addition to her writing, she became well known for her public speaking, giving passionate and uncompromising speeches that inspired her audience to action. In the 1970s and 80s, Dworkin was at the forefront of a group working to make pornography illegal. Alongside legal scholar Catherine McKinnon, she helped to draft legal amendments to be used by American states to acknowledge that pornography was sex discrimination and a violation of civil rights. The aim, rather than censoring or banning pornography, was to allow those harmed by pornography to make a claim for damages in the civil courts. Ultimately, Dworkin and McKinnon were unsuccessful in getting this passed into law. However, their work led to increased media attention and to a wider debate in educational and legislative settings, as well as in wider society. Dworkin also gave evidence for the New York Attorney General's Commission on Pornography in 1986. Again, her campaign to persuade them to make legislative change was not successful, but her evidence did persuade some retailers into withdrawing adult photography magazines from their shelves, and her speaking and writing resulted in a much wider public debate on the subject of pornography and prostitution. Andrea died young of ill health in 2005, aged just 58. Her message and her style were controversial, but she remains one of the defining voices of Western second-wave feminism. She's a personal hero for me for many reasons, but mainly because she helped me with my own understanding of how to understand and evaluate and characterize sexual violence. On a broader note, she also showed me that it's okay for people to be uncomfortable with what I have to say, but that I need to be brave and stand up and say things when they're important. So that's why I chose Andrea Dworkin. And now I'm going to pass back to Esther.
Okay, so now you've heard about our heroes, we want to introduce you to some LGBT plus scientists. There are many, many people that think LGBT plus people's achievements are only in the fields of performing arts, fashion, design, or painting. However, we know of so many LGBT plus people who have done and are doing amazing things in many other fields: educators, politicians, sports professionals, and as tech entrepreneurs, just to give you a few examples. And so today we've decided to concentrate on LGBT plus people who have made significant contributions to society in the scientific field. There are 6 people that we want to introduce you to. You might recognize some of them, or you might not. From top left to bottom right, they are Rachel Carson, Dr. Alan L. Hart, Dr. Ronx Ikaria, Oliver Sacks, Sally Ride, and Nergis Mavalvala. I'm going to start with Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson was born near Pittsburgh, USA on the 27th of May, 1907. As a child, she loved reading and writing, and she had her first story published in a children's magazine when she was just 10. Rachel studied marine science at university, and in her mid-20s, she began writing radio scripts and articles on sea life. She wrote 3 books warning people about damage to the ocean and a book about chemicals used in farming that could hurt both wildlife and people. The latter actually led to a ban on a chemical called DDT. She met Dorothy Freeman in 1953. Whenever they weren't together, they wrote love letters to each other. They were worried that people would find out about their close relationship from the letters, and so they burned most of them. But some weren't burned and were later published, which is how we know about their relationship. Rachel was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Jimmy Carter in 1980. This is America's highest civilian honor, presented to individuals who have made significant contributions to the betterment of the United States, or to world peace.
Our second scientist for today is Alan L. Hart. Born on the 4th of October, 1890 in Kansas, USA, Hart was a transgender doctor who developed the technique of using X-rays to detect tuberculosis or TB, and he helped to implement TB screening programs. Hart was also one of the first patients in the world to undergo a hysterectomy as a form of gender-affirming care. He also wrote several memoir-based fiction novels which touched on the themes of sexuality and gender dysphoria, as well as medical themes. Hart transitioned after finishing medical school and achieving a PhD. After transitioning, Hart was hired as a medical intern in San Francisco in 1917. 3 months later, Hart applied for a job at a nearby hospital and was recognized by a fellow student from med school. Having been outed, they had to move to start again. And in fact, this was a recurring theme for Hart's life throughout the 1920s as they grew in experience as a doctor. In the early 20th century, TB was the biggest killer in America. And at that time, school X-rays were only used to detect bone fractures and tumors. Hart developed their use in the early detection of TB. His work improved access to earlier treatment and enabled reductions in transmission through isolation, thus saving many thousands of lives.
Okay, our next scientist for today is Dr. Ronks. Dr. Ronks was born in London, and their birthday is the 10th of May, 1984. They first decided that they wanted to be a doctor at the age of 12. They had a difficult childhood and unfortunately had to leave home as a teenager. But Dr. Ronks worked really hard to be able to go to medical school, and they earned all the money they needed for fees by taking part-time jobs in shops, modeling, and even being a background dancer in music videos. They identify as trans and non-binary, and they use they/them pronouns. Dr. Ronks graduated from medical school in 2011, and they specialize in emergency medicine. As well as being a doctor, they also present medical shows on TV for both children and adults, including Operation Ouch.
Our fourth scientist for today is Oliver Sacks. Oliver Sacks was born in London in the UK. His birthday is the 9th of July, 1933. He was raised within a Jewish family. Oliver gained his interest in medicine from his parents, as both were doctors, and his mother was one of the first female surgeons in England. When he was 6, World War II broke out, and he and his brother were sent away to boarding school. They were very badly treated there. While at university, he spent the summer of 1955 living on kibbutz Ein HaShofet in northern Israel and travelling around the new state of Israel. After qualifying as a doctor in England, he moved first to Canada and then to America, where he lived for the rest of his life, working as a neurologist. That's a doctor who specialises in treating disorders that affect the brain. He wrote for a general readership about previously unknown or misunderstood conditions such as Tourette's syndrome and autism. By doing this, he became the godfather of what came to be called neurodiversity. Oliver never married, and he first publicly addressed the fact that he was gay only in 2015 in his autobiography at the age of 82. He died the same year with his long-term partner Bill Hayes at his side.
fifth scientist for today is Sally Ride. Now, Sally Ride was born in Los Angeles in 1951. As a child, Sally played a lot of tennis and was ranked the 20th best player in California for her age. While at university, she still hoped to be a professional tennis player, but she realized it would be too hard and so decided to be a scientist and study physics instead. She was accepted onto NASA's space program to be an astronaut in 1978 at only age 27, and in 1983 she became the first American woman and the third woman ever, and the youngest American, to fly into space. Later in her career, she created science programs for secondary school students with a particular focus on encouraging girls to be scientists. Now, Sally originally married a man, but after a few years, she fell in love with a woman called Tam. After divorcing, her relationship with Tam lasted the rest of her life, and she's the first astronaut known to be LGBT+. Sally received many different honors and awards for her contribution to science, including the US Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2013. In 2022, she became the first known LGBT+ person to appear on US currency on the 25-cent coin.
And finally, the last of our 6 scientists for this session. This is Nergis Marvalvala. Nergis was born in Lahore in Pakistan in 1968. Her family's roots are in Persia, now Iran, and she was raised within a Zoroastrian family. Nergis moved to America in 1986 to study physics and astronomy. She's now a professor at MIT, which is a top US university, and she works on gravitational waves. These are ripples which occur when big objects speed up as they move through space. Her team was the first ever to observe these waves. The Prime Minister of Pakistan praised her, calling her a source of inspiration for Pakistani scientists and students aspiring to become future scientists. Nergis identifies as a lesbian and describes herself as an out person of colour. She lives with her partner and their 2 children. Nergis is often asked about how she was able to break through the barriers of gender roles and pursue a career of her choice. She speaks about how people in Pakistan can achieve their goals despite stereotypes and stigmas. She's won many prizes and awards for her work, including the Gruber Prize, which is a prestigious international award in the field of cosmology. So that is our 6 scientists. As part of last year's LGBT+ History Month last year's live with UJS, I talked a little bit about the amazing work of Israeli graphic designer Michal Shomer, who created 12 new Hebrew alphabet letters to enable written Hebrew to be more gender inclusive. If you want to find out more about her work, you can Google her name, Michal Shomer, Shomer, and the Holon Design Museum, or Multigender Hebrew. Please do, it's very fascinating. However, today, what I'll be sharing is a little bit of information about the very recent history of efforts to reinvent Hebrew so that it can be gender inclusive. In English, it is usual to write about most objects in a way that is gender neutral. For example, if you want to describe the size of a coat, you can say a small coat. Likewise, if you want to describe the size of a t-shirt, you can say a small t-shirt. But in Hebrew, as in French, and as in many other languages, coat and t-shirt and every other noun are allocated as either masculine or feminine. So the word coat in Hebrew, me'il, is designated masculine, and therefore a small coat would be translated into Hebrew as me'il katan, as katan is the masculine form of the Hebrew word for small. However, a small t-shirt would be chutza ktana, as t-shirt is designated feminine, and therefore the adjective is amended from the masculine form katan to the feminine form ktana to match. Likewise, the ending of an adjective for multiple items is also gendered in Hebrew. For example, in English, you would use the word small whether you were talking about one coat or lots of coats. However, in Hebrew, there are separate masculine and feminine plural forms, and there are even gendered forms of numbers. So 2 small coats would be shnei me'ilim ktanim, while 2 small t-shirts would be shtei chutzot ktanot. This gendering of absolutely everything makes things complex for Hebrew-speaking non-binary people, as everything is rendered masculine or feminine. That includes pronouns that in English are used for everyone, including you and they, which in Hebrew have two forms, i.e. masculine and feminine. However, over the years, some people have tried to find ways to be inclusive of non-binary people when speaking Hebrew, and I'm going to share two of these ways with you now. Habonim Dror, a youth movement which in 2016 had a series of camps where some non-binary young people were coming and felt uncomfortable, decided that they would try and devise new words to be able to use on camp so that everybody could feel comfortable and still use Hebrew. This is what they came up with. Instead of only using masculine and feminine suffixes, we already discussed, for example, katan and katana, they decided to create a new singular neutral suffix based on the word kol, which means all. They came up with a suffix ol. And then for the plural, they combined the Hebrew masculine plural suffix im and the feminine plural suffix ot to create imot. Here's one example below. If you imagine that we have the word chanich, which means participant. Esther, if you could click, please. So you would, in normal original Hebrew, you would have chanich or female form chanicha, and the masculine plural, which includes the feminine, chanichim. Now, through the work of Habonim Dror, there are additional options. So you would have chanich, chanicha for the feminine, and chanichol for the non-binary or gender inclusive. And then for the plural, rather than using chanichim to include the female, some organizations now use both the imot, so chanichimot, to include everybody. That's one example to share with you, the work of Habonim Dror. The next set of work that I want to tell you a little bit about is the gender expansive Hebrew that's been worked on by a team of people in Jerusalem. They call it Ivrit Morevet, regular everyday Hebrew. And what they've done is they've decided to create a gender expansive suffix that can be used for everything, irrespective of whether a noun or an adjective is originally designated feminine or masculine. So for the most part, they would use this process would use the suffix e. However, for example, when you already have a word that ends in e, for example, more, teacher, male teacher, then you would change it to et. And then for a plural gender expansive suffix, they would use emen. I'll show you an example of that now. If you look at the original words we discussed, chanich and chanichim, in this system, unlike the Habonim Dror system, everybody would be called chaniche, and the plural would be chanichemen. So some organizations also will use this occasionally in written language, but mostly both types of systems are used in written language and can also be spoken. So those are the two different ways of being gender inclusive for words that take masculine or feminine endings. However, I also wanted, before we wrap up, to share a few words that some of you might not be aware of that sit within, I guess you would call it neo-language, or new words that are being used in Israel to support people who don't fit within a gender binary. So the first term you could see here, Rav Magdari, multigender, as opposed to now we have an even newer term, Nozel Megdar, gender fluid, and also a term which literally means sort of flexible in sexuality. That would be the literal meaning. But in principle, we would use these words, gamish b'minyut, as pansexual. And so slowly, people are working in Israel and beyond to help Jewish non-binary people to be able to feel comfortable within their own language. Having said that, I've definitely heard speakers on this subject to say that even if the Hebrew that is being used is gendered, because most Hebrew is, that doesn't mean to say that non-binary people don't count within the Jewish Israeli community, and that they are still there, even if perhaps they're not heard in language. So even if you yourself are working in gendered binary Hebrew, that doesn't mean to say that we can't be holding non-binary people within the Jewish Israeli community. So that's just a little bit about a brief history of changes in spoken Hebrew.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in the last sort of 40-ish minutes. We've spoken about the creator of LGBT Plus History Month and the fact that it's the 20th anniversary this year. We've learned a little bit about personal LGBT plus heroes, activists and scientists from the last 150 years. And we've also looked a little bit about gender inclusive spoken Hebrew and how that's developing and changing. On this slide, you can see some suggestions for things you can do if you're inspired to continue your learning. In addition, if you want to go back and watch this again, the recording will still be on the UJS social media feeds. Now, if you want to see more of the education and training work that Keshet UK does, and you'd like us to come and run a session for your JSOC, please get in touch with us via our website, our email, or using our Instagram handle, which is Keshet UK or PVO Keshet UK. If you're coming to UJS Scotland Convention, please do come and say hello to me in person, because I'd love to meet you. Now, our session is nearly at an end, but we do ask that you please scan the QR code on the screen and let us know what you think of this session. Now, your feedback is completely and utterly anonymous, and it will only take you a minute to complete. But we really do value the feedback, and we use it to improve these sessions and future student workshops and training sessions.
Before we finish, before we finish, we'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of you for being a part of this, and to UJS for collaborating with Keshet UK to mark LGBT Plus History Month with the Jewish student community. This workshop has been a fantastic opportunity to share some of the rich history of LGBT plus people's achievements. We've seen how diverse people in the LGBT plus community are. We've created space for people who historically have been ignored or excluded, and we've shown that barriers can be overcome. We've really enjoyed putting all this information together, and we hope it inspires you to mark LGBT Plus History Month in other ways over the next few weeks.
Thank you so much, and we wish you have a really good rest of your evening and a very happy, meaningful, and maybe inspiring LGBT Plus History Month. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.